Jack's gonna make a nice fillet out of it, my son.
Don't you worry now, we know where it is, we'll take care of it.
No, we will. I have everything, sure.
Maybe that first birthday of yours was exactly 6 weeks ago, right?
I think so, yes.
Mr. O'Connell, no, wait, hold on a minute. You've done the wrong man. Ah, that bracelet. Yes, of course, now I remember. I lost in the card game.
When did you learn to do that?
I have no idea.
That I learned from your father.
I don't mean to point fingers, but isn't it your job to make sure that doesn't happen?
The woman who's with him, she knows things. Things that no living person could possibly know. She knew exactly what the creature was bearing. We were hoping she would lead us to the bracelet. She understand that?
The sands of Egypt do not just hide treasure in this film, they hide obsession, unfinished love, ancient power, and a warning that some doors should never be opened twice. Welcome back to the Fin Box, where we do not just talk about movies from the surface. We step inside them. We slow them down. We look at the choices, the symbols, the spectacle, the strange little details, and the emotional machinery working underneath the adventure. Because every film is a box, we open it together. And today that box is The Mummy Returns, the 2001 adventure sequel that takes everything from the first film, The desert, the curses, the humor, the romance, the monsters, the ancient legends, and pushes it into a much bigger, louder, more chaotic world. This is not a quiet sequel. This is not a film trying to be subtle. This is a movie that opens its arms wide and says, more armies, more mythology, more supernatural danger, more family stakes, more ancient history, more explosions, more creatures, and yes, more Brandon Fraser running through disaster with that perfect mix of courage, confusion, and charm. But here's the interesting thing. The Mummy Returns is often remembered as a fun blockbuster, and that is fair. It is fun. It is fast. It is packed with old school adventure energy. But when you look closer, there is something deeper happening inside all that spectacle. This is a film about the past refusing to stay buried. Not just ancient Egypt as history, but personal history, love that comes back, mistakes that return, power that was never fully defeated, family secrets that begin to awaken. The movie keeps asking one question in different ways. What happens when the things you thought were finished come back stronger than before? That is why this sequel is built around return. Imhotep returns, Anck-su-namun returns, ancient warriors return, old destinies return. Even Rick and Evy are not simply living a peaceful life after the first movie. Their past adventure has followed them home, and now it reaches directly into their family. That changes the emotional shape of the story. The first film was about survival, discovery, and romantic adventure. This one is about legacy. It asks what you pass down, what you inherit, and what kind of danger wakes up when your child becomes part of a story that started thousands of years before he was born. And that is where The Mummy Returns becomes more than just another sequel chasing bigger action. It turns adventure into inheritance. Rick is no longer just the reckless hero with a gun and a grin. Evie is no longer just a brilliant scholar pulled into danger. They are parents now. That one change raises the emotional stakes immediately. The danger is not only about stopping a monster or saving the world. It is about protecting the person who carries their future. And when a film like this adds family into the middle of ancient mythology, everything becomes more personal. Of course, we have to be honest from the beginning. This is not a perfect film. It has moments where the story moves too quickly. It has visual effects that were ambitious for the time but do not always hold up with the same magic today. It has so many ideas fighting for space that some characters and emotional beats do not get the depth they deserve. But even with those flaws, there is a reason people still return to this movie. There is a reason it still feels alive. The energy is real. The sense of adventure is real. The cast has that rare blockbuster chemistry where even the ridiculous moments feel strangely lovable. And maybe that is the secret. The Mummy Returns understands that adventure cinema is not only about logic, it is about momentum. It is about atmosphere. It is about the feeling that a map, a bracelet, a temple, or a forgotten tomb could suddenly turn the normal world into a doorway. The film gives you that feeling again and again. It wants you to believe that history is not dead. It is waiting. It is breathing under the sand. It is watching from the shadows of museums and ruins. And when the right mistake happens, it wakes up. So in this breakdown, we are going to open the film layer by layer. We will talk about why this sequel exists, what it tries to expand, what it does brilliantly, and where it loses control of its own scale. We will look at the filmmaking, the action rhythm, the mythology, the performances, the emotional stakes, the fan theories, the legacy, and the full spoiler breakdown when the time comes. We will look at why Brendan Fraser's Rick O'Connell still works so well as an adventure hero, why Rachel Weisz gives Evie more emotional weight than the movie sometimes gives her credit for, why Imhotep remains such a fascinating villain, and why the film's biggest strength and biggest weakness may actually be the same thing. It wants to give you everything. Because The Mummy Returns is a sequel with no fear of excess. It does not whisper, it charges. It throws you into battles, temples, visions, chases, rituals, ancient curses, and family danger with almost no pause. For some people, that makes it messy. For others, that makes it unforgettable. And honestly, both reactions can be true at the same time. A film can be flawed and still deeply entertaining. A movie can be uneven and still full of personality. Sometimes the box is not clean and perfect. Sometimes it is crowded, dusty, overfilled, and glowing with strange energy. But when you open it, you still find something worth talking about. So picture this: the desert is not empty. The past is not silent. A bracelet becomes a key. A child becomes a target. A forgotten army waits for command. And somewhere between love, death, destiny, and spectacle, The Mummy Returns tries to turn a monster sequel into a family adventure about the terrifying weight of ancient history. Let's open this up. The most fascinating thing about The Mummy Returns is not that it brings the mummy back. That is what the title promises. That is what the poster sells. That is what you expect when you walk in. The real hook is that the film does something bigger than resurrection. It turns the entire world of the first movie into a family curse. That is the twist hiding in plain sight. In the first film, Rick and Evy survive an ancient nightmare because they accidentally step into it. They are outsiders. They enter the tomb, awaken something dangerous, and then fight their way back out. But in The Mummy Returns, the danger does not stay in Egypt. It follows them home. It walks into their house. It reaches for their child. It says in its own supernatural way, "You were never finished with this story." That is a powerful sequel idea. Because a weaker version of this movie could have simply repeated the first one. Another tomb, another curse, another accidental awakening, another desert chase. But this film understands that a sequel needs escalation that feels personal, not only bigger. So it asks, what if the adventure did not end when the heroes escaped? What if the first movie was not just a wild chapter in Rick and Evy's lives, but the beginning of a destiny they did not fully understand? That single idea changes everything. Now the past is no longer just something Evie studies. It is something living inside her dreams. It is something connected to her identity. It is something that recognizes her before she fully recognizes herself. And Rick, who once seemed like the ultimate man of action, suddenly has to deal with a kind of danger that cannot be solved only by being brave. He can fight soldiers. He can survive traps. He can take punches, make jokes, and keep moving. But when the threat is ancient fate moving toward his family, his strength becomes more emotional than physical. That is where the movie grabs you. Because The Mummy Returns is built on a simple but effective emotional engine, the heroes have more to lose this time. The first film had romance, danger, comedy, and discovery. This one adds parenthood. And once Alex is pulled into the center of the plot, the adventure stops being just a race against evil and becomes a desperate rescue mission. The film turns the entire mythological machine into pressure on one family. Every ancient symbol, every hidden clue, every resurrected enemy, every supernatural force now bends toward the same question. Can Rick and Evie protect their son from a past that is older than anything they can control? Here's what most people miss. The movie is not only bringing back Imhotep as a villain, it is bringing back unfinished emotional business. Imhotep is still chasing a love that has consumed him beyond death. Anck-su-namun is still tied to ambition, desire, and self-preservation. Evie is pulled toward memories that suggest her life may be part of something much older. Rick carries signs of a destiny that the film slowly begins to reveal. Everyone in the story is being dragged by something from before. Nobody is completely free. That is why the film feels so crowded with mythology, sometimes too crowded, but thematically it makes sense. The Mummy Returns is obsessed with repetition, love repeating, war repeating, power repeating, death repeating, mistakes repeating. It is a movie about cycles. Ancient people wanted control, and modern people are still paying the price. Ancient loyalty failed, and modern loyalty gets tested. Ancient ambition opened a door, and modern greed opens it wider. And then the film adds the Scorpion King. On the surface, this looks like blockbuster expansion. A new warrior, a new legend, a new supernatural threat, a bigger final boss waiting at the edge of the story. But underneath that, the Scorpion King represents something important: the danger of bargaining with power when you are desperate. His legend is not just decoration, it is a warning. He wants victory so badly that he accepts a force he cannot truly control. That mirrors the entire film. Imhotep wants love and power so badly that he keeps tearing open the natural order. The cultists want dominion so badly that they risk awakening forces beyond them. Even the heroes, in a different way, must confront what it means to touch ancient power and survive the consequences. That is the hook. This is not just a monster movie. It is a story where everyone is chasing something buried. Some chase love, some chase control, some chase identity, some chase family. And the deeper they dig, the more the past digs back. The best adventure films always understand this. Treasure is never just treasure. A map is never just a map. A tomb is never just a tomb. The object the heroes find must unlock a deeper problem. And in The Mummy Returns, the bracelet does exactly that. It is small enough to fit on a wrist, but powerful enough to turn a child into the center of a supernatural countdown. That is classic adventure storytelling. Take something ancient, place it in innocent hands, and suddenly the whole world starts moving. And the film moves fast, almost too fast. It barely lets you breathe before another piece of mythology falls into place. But that speed is part of its identity. The Mummy Returns feels like a roller coaster built inside a museum, where every exhibit suddenly becomes dangerous. 1 minute, you are in a domestic space with Rick, Evy, and Alex. The next, the walls of ordinary life collapse and the ancient world storms in. That collision is what gives the movie its energy. Look closer at this setup and you can see why it still works for so many people. It gives you spectacle, but it anchors that spectacle in a family bond. It gives you ancient evil, but it makes the danger immediate. It gives you mythology, but it filters that mythology through love, fear, loyalty, and sacrifice. And even when the film becomes wild, even when the effects become uneven, even when the story takes enormous swings, the emotional question stays clear. Will this family survive what history has awakened? That is why The Mummy Returns has a stronger hook than people sometimes give it credit for. It is not only asking whether the mummy can be stopped again. It is asking whether the O'Connells can escape a story that may have been waiting for them long before they even knew their own names. And once you understand that, the sequel becomes much more interesting, because now every chase, every vision, every ancient clue, and every supernatural threat is not just noise. It is the past tightening its grip. So before we walk into the story itself, we need to step behind the camera. Because a movie this large does not happen by accident. Its scale, its energy, its casting choices, its visual ambition, and even its most famous flaws all come from the way it was built. Before the story throws us back into curses, temples, bracelets, and armies made of nightmares, the first thing to understand is that The Mummy Returns was built with a very clear sequel philosophy. Do not shrink anything. Sommers did not approach this as a smaller continuation. He wrote and directed it like a full expansion of the world he had already opened in 1999, and according to production materials, he moved the story to 1933, 8 years after the first film, specifically so Rick and Evy could evolve from adventurers into a married couple with a child. That matters because the movie's emotional engine begins before the action even starts. The sequel is not asking, can these two survive another curse? It is asking, what happens when the people who survive the curse now have a family that can be hurt by it? And that choice changes the way you see Rick O'Connell. In the first movie, he is almost pure adventure energy. Brave, funny, reckless, hard to scare, and always half a second away from either saving the day or making the situation worse. But in The Mummy Returns, the production team understood that giving him a son would expose a different side of him. Producer James Jacks framed the family element as both Rick's strength and his weakness, because his adventures now carry personal risk. That is not just a behind-the-scenes detail. It explains why the film feels more urgent. When Rick runs this time, he is not only running toward danger, he is running toward his child. The action has a pulse because the hero's fear is no longer abstract. It is sitting in the back of a train, wearing the bracelet of Anubis, becoming the key to a war older than civilization. The second fascinating production choice is how determined the filmmakers were to bring back the original core cast. Sommers and the returning actors reportedly did not want to make a sequel unless the idea could justify itself. That is important because the biggest strength of The Mummy Returns is not the CGI, not the mythology, not even the massive desert scale. It is chemistry. Brendan Fraser, Richard Weisz, John Hannah, Arnold Vosloo, and Oded Fehr do not feel like strangers being pushed through a studio sequel. They feel like people returning to a shared rhythm. The banter has memory. The reactions have history. The jokes land because you already believe these people have survived the impossible together. And when a sequel has that kind of returning energy, the film can move faster because the relationships do not need to be rebuilt from zero. Look close at Evy because the film's production decisions around her are especially revealing. In the first movie, Evie is brilliant, curious, clumsy in an endearing way, and emotionally fearless long before she becomes physically fearless. In the sequel, the filmmakers push her into a more active mythological and combat role. According to production notes, Rachel Weisz and Patricia Velasquez trained extensively through the shoot for their ancient Egyptian combat scenes, using movement inspired by martial arts and weapons choreography. That training changes the way you read their scenes together. The flashbacks are not just decorative mythology. They are designed to give Evie a physical history, a sense that her connection to the past is not only intellectual. Her body, her dreams, and her instincts all become part of the story. That is why the dual energy in the film feels different from the usual blockbuster side plot. It is not simply the heroine gets an action scene. It is the movie trying to visually connect two timelines through movement. Evie does not only remember the past, she almost moves like the past has been waiting inside her. That idea is melodramatic, yes, but it fits the film's style. The Mummy Returns is not subtle about destiny. It paints destiny in gold, sand, fire, blades, visions, and reincarnated emotion. So when Evie becomes more physical, the film is saying that history does not live only in books, it can live in people. The third major behind the lens detail is the scale of the location work. According to production notes and location records, the film used Morocco, Jordan, London, Buckinghamshire, Bedfordshire, and Shepperton studios to build its world. Principal photography began in Morocco. Second unit work was completed in Jordan, and major sequences used locations around Petra, the Hejaz Railway near Amman, Shepperton Studios, Tower Bridge, London streets, and English countryside locations dressed into the film's fantasy geography. That matters because the movie's world feels like a collision between real places and artificial myth. You can feel that collision in the London material. The O'Connell's home has the elegance of old wealth and museum adventure fantasy, while the British Museum material is stitched together from different real locations. The film does not treat London as boring normal life. It turned London into a place where ancient Egypt can invade the modern world. A domestic house becomes the first line of defense. A museum becomes a resurrection chamber. A city street becomes an action track for supernatural pursuit. That is why the early London section works so well. It gives you a familiar world, then lets the impossible crawl across its walls. And then Morocco and Jordan give the film its other face. Heat, distance, ruins, railways, dunes, and ancient scale. The desert is not just a backdrop, it is the movie's memory. Every time the story moves away from London and back into sand, it feels like the film is returning to its natural element. The first Mummy made the desert feel like a place where history could breathe. The sequel tries to make it feel even larger, almost like the earth itself is hiding an army. So when you see those landscapes, you are not only looking at location photography, you are looking at the film's emotional geography. London represents the life Rick and Evie built. The desert represents the story that refuses to let them keep it. The fourth production fact is one of the most important and most complicated. Industrial Light and Magic handled the visual effects, with John Burton leading the effects team for both the first film and the sequel. Production notes describe the sequel as an attempt to push beyond the first movie's effects, using improved computer-generated techniques to create Imhotep, the Scorpion King, Anubis warriors, and other supernatural creatures. This is where the film becomes fascinating because the visual effects are both part of its ambition and part of its reputation problem. At the time, the goal was spectacle. The filmmakers wanted Imhotep to interact more, to feel stronger, and to share the screen with creatures that could not exist through practical effects alone. And in many places, that ambition works. The sand, the transformations, the supernatural movement, and the creature concepts create a pulpy fantasy energy that matches the tone. But when people talk about The Mummy Returns today, they often remember the digital Scorpion King as the moment the illusion strains. That criticism is understandable. Some effects age better than others. But here's where it gets layered. The imperfect effects also show how aggressively the film was trying to expand blockbuster fantasy at the beginning of the 2000s. It was reaching for a scale that technology was still learning how to make convincing. That does not excuse every shot, but it does help explain the texture of the movie. The Mummy Returns belongs to a specific moment in visual effects history when Hollywood was becoming more confident with CGI, but had not yet found the balance between digital creatures, actor performance, lighting, weight, and realism. So when the film works visually, it feels magical. When it does not, it feels like ambition outrunning execution. And honestly, that is one of the reasons the movie is still interesting to discuss. Its flaws are not lazy flaws, they are oversized blockbuster flaws. The fin swings hard and sometimes the swing connects, sometimes it misses, but it never feels small. The fifth behind the lens detail is Dwayne Johnson's introduction as the Scorpion King. Production notes frame The Rock as joining the film in his first major screen role, and that casting changed more than one movie. At the time, he was already a massive wrestling star, but The Mummy Returns used him as mythic spectacle, a warrior king, a prologue figure, a curse origin, and a final supernatural threat. The role is not large in terms of screen time, but it is huge in franchise meaning. It gave Universal a character strong enough to spin off into the Scorpion King, and it helped begin Johnson's long transition from wrestling icon to movie star. Inside The Mummy Returns itself, that casting gives the film a strange kind of electricity. The Scorpion King is less a character than a legend the movie keeps building toward. He is the shadow over the entire plot. He represents power won through desperation, victory purchased at the cost of the soul. And because Johnson's physical presence already carried a larger-than-life quality, the film uses him almost like a living statue from a myth. He does not need many scenes to matter. He matters because everyone else believes he matters. The sixth detail, and maybe the most revealing one, is the film's budget and box office scale. The number lists a production budget of about $98 million, while Box Office Mojo reports a worldwide gross above $433 million. That means The Mummy Returns was not just a sequel made because the studio had nothing else to do. It was a major commercial machine designed to capitalize on the first film's success and turn this adventure horror comedy blend into a full franchise. And you can feel that money on screen. You feel it in the sets, the crowds, the creature work, the travel, the costumes, the action set pieces, the scale of the final conflict. But you also feel the pressure of that money. The film has the energy of a blockbuster that knows it has to be bigger. Bigger family stakes, bigger mythology, bigger villain structure, bigger supernatural army, bigger action, bigger ending. That is thrilling, but it is also dangerous, because when a sequel keeps adding, it risks losing the clean simplicity that made the original so satisfying. That is the real behind-the-lens story of The Mummy Returns. It was built by people trying to expand everything that worked the first time. The romance, the comedy, the danger, the mythology, the adventure, the effects, the locations, and the emotional stakes. Sometimes that expansion gives the film its best moments. Sometimes it makes the movie feel overloaded. But either way, you can see the intention clearly. This was not a sequel trying to quietly repeat the formula, it was a sequel trying to turn one costume adventure into a whole mythological universe. And once you know that, the film becomes easier to understand. Its speed, its excess, its heart, its flaws, its ambition, they all come from the same place. The filmmakers opened the first box in 1999, found treasure inside, and then decided that the second box should be bigger, louder, stranger, and far more dangerous. Now that we understand how it was built, we can open the movie itself. The Mummy Returns is a 2001 action-adventure fantasy film written and directed by Sommers, and it stands as the direct sequel to The Mummy from 1999. It brings back Brendan Fraser as Rick O'Connell, Rachel Weisz as Evelyn, John Hannah as Jonathan, Arnold Vosloo as Imhotep, Oded Fehr as Ardedbe, and Patricia Velasquez as Anck-su-namun, while adding Freddie Bothell, Alex, and Dwayne Johnson as the Scorpion King. On paper, that sounds like a simple continuation. The heroes return, the villain returns, the ancient danger returns. But the real identity of this movie is bigger than that. The Mummy Returns is not just trying to repeat the first film's tomb raiding adventure. It is trying to turn that adventure into a full mythological universe. This is where the franchise stops being only about one cursed priest and one awakened monster. Now it becomes a world of ancient bloodlines, forgotten armies, reincarnated memory, sacred objects, desert warriors, secret societies, and supernatural rule that have been waiting beneath history. At its heart, this is a family adventure wrapped inside an ancient apocalypse story. That is the key. The film exists because the first Mummy found a very rare balance. It took old adventure serial energy, classic monster movie atmosphere, romantic comedy chemistry, and supernatural horror imagery, then made all of it feel accessible and fun. It was scary without becoming too heavy. It was funny without becoming a parody. It was romantic without slowing down the adventure. And most importantly, it had characters you wanted to follow again. So when The Mummy Returns arrives, it knows the audience is not just coming back for curses and sandstorms. You are coming back for Rick, Evie, Jonathan, Ardeth, and even Imhotep. You are coming back because the first film made danger feel like a place you secretly wanted to visit. This sequel is inspired by the same adventure tradition, but it stretches the canvas. You can feel the shadow of old Pulp Fiction, 1930s expedition fantasies, classic Hollywood monster cinema, and treasure hunt storytelling. But instead of keeping the story contained around a hidden city and one resurrection, the sequel reaches for something closer to mythic war. The world is not just threatened by one immortal figure anymore. The film now imagines ancient Egypt as a place where power was layered, where one curse could connect to another, where one legend could awaken a second, even darker legend. And that gives the movie its shape. The Mummy Returns is built like a chase. Almost everything in it is moving toward a deadline, a place, a ritual, a confrontation. The characters rarely get to stand still for long. They are pulled from London into the desert, from domestic life into ancient danger, from family warmth into supernatural pressure. That constant forward motion is part of why the movie feels so entertaining, but it is also part of why it can feel overcrowded. It wants to be a rescue story, a reincarnation story, a villain love story, a monster movie, a treasure adventure, a sword and sorcery fantasy, and a family blockbuster all at once. The surprising thing is that a lot of it still works. Not because every plot point is perfectly clean. It is not. Not because every visual effect has aged beautifully. Some have not. Not because every character receives equal depth. They do not. It works because the film has personality. The world feels alive. The cast knows exactly what tone they are playing. Brendan Fraser gives Rick that rare heroic quality where he can be strong without being stiff, funny without undercutting the danger, and emotionally sincere without making the film feel heavy. Rachel Weisz brings intelligence and warmth to Evie, but this time she also gives her a stronger sense of mystery and destiny. John Hannah keeps Jonathan funny, but his comedy works because it feels rooted in cowardice, survival instinct, and accidental usefulness rather than random jokes. Arnold Vosloo gives Imhotep a presence that still feels elegant and dangerous, even when the film around him becomes louder. The spoiler-free verdict is this: The Mummy Returns is a messy but highly enjoyable sequel. It is bigger than the first movie in almost every possible way, but not always better. The first film is cleaner, tighter, and more balanced. This sequel is more ambitious, more chaotic, and more overloaded, but it also has a strong emotional hook, an enormous sense of momentum, and the kind of old school adventure charm that modern blockbusters often try to recreate but rarely capture with the same confidence. This is a film for you if you love adventure movies that feel like theme park rides in the best way. If you enjoy ancient curses, secret chambers, desert legends, heroic families, supernatural villains, fast escapes, impossible maps, and characters who react to danger with both fear and humor, this movie gives you a lot to enjoy. It is especially rewarding if you already love the first Mummy, because the sequel depends on your affection for that world. It assumes you want to spend more time with these people. It assumes you are ready for the box to get bigger. But if you want a tightly controlled story with quiet character drama and perfect internal logic, this may not fully satisfy you. The movie asks you to accept a lot. It asks you to ride with the energy instead of stopping to inspect every mechanism. It asks you to enjoy the spectacle even when the mythology becomes crowded. That does not mean you have to ignore its flaws. It means the film's pleasures come from motion, tone, and feeling more than precision. So, what kind of story is this really? It is a story about what happens after adventure becomes family history. Rick and Evy once opened a forbidden door and survived. Now that door opens again, but this time their child is standing close to it. That is why the sequel matters. It takes the fun of the first film and asks what that fun costs when the danger follows you into the life you build afterward. And that is why, before spoilers begin, The Mummy Returns deserves to be understood as more than a loud sequel. It is a blockbuster about legacy disguised as a roller coaster. It is about parents trying to outrun a curse, a villain trying to resurrect the past, and a world where history does not stay in books. It waits. Then it reaches back. The first watch feeling of The Mummy Returns is immediate access. That is not an insult. That is the movie's handshake. From the very beginning, it wants you to know that this sequel is not going to slowly tiptoe back into the world of ancient curses. It throws open the doors, pulls you into the desert, shows you a warrior chasing impossible power, and tells you that the story you are about to enter is larger than one tomb, one priest, or one forbidden book. I walked in expecting another supernatural adventure with Rick and Evy facing Imhotep again, but the film gave me something bigger, stranger, and more crowded. It gave me a world where the first movie suddenly feels like only one chapter in a much older myth. That is the first thing that hits you. The scale has changed. The first film had the feeling of a cursed treasure hunt. This one feels like the map has expanded in every direction. The opening does something very smart. It does not begin with Rick. It does not begin with Evie. It begins in legend. The film wants you to feel that before our heroes even appear, history has already been moving. Ancient ambition has already made a terrible bargain. A warrior has already reached beyond human limits. A curse has already been planted deep in the sand. That gives the movie a different kind of atmosphere from the first film. The first movie invites you into a mystery. The sequel drops you into a myth that is already burning, and you can feel that tone immediately. The world of The Mummy Returns is brighter, louder, and more openly fantastical. The desert looks less like a realistic place and more like a stage for destiny. The temples feel like doors to another age. The supernatural elements arrive with less restraint. The movie is not trying to make you wonder whether ancient magic is real. It assumes you already know it is real, and now it wants to show you how much bigger that magic can become. That is one of the pleasures of watching it for the first time. You are not waiting for the world to reveal itself slowly. You are being pulled into a ride that has already started moving. There is a confidence in that. The film knows you probably remember the rules from the first one. It knows you know the dead can return, curses can awaken, and ancient Egypt is not safely locked in the past. So instead of rebuilding that belief, it accelerates. Then the movie brings you into Rick and Evy's life, and this is where the feeling shifts. Suddenly, the adventure as a home. That matters more than it might seem. Seeing them as a married couple with a son gives the sequel warmth before it gives you danger. It creates the feeling that time has passed, not just in the plot, but in their lives. They did not freeze after the first movie ended. They grew, they built something. They became a family. And because of that, the danger lands differently. In the first film, when Rick and Evie walked into danger, part of the fun was that they were discovering each other while discovering the curse. The romance and the adventure were happening at the same time. In The Mummy Returns, the romance already exists. The bond is already there. So the film does not need to ask whether they will fall for each other. It asks whether what they build can survive what is coming for them. That creates a warmer, more personal first watch feeling. The movie still has jokes, it still has big action, it still has that pulpy sense of fun. But underneath it, there is a parental fear that the first movie did not have. When Alex enters the story, he does not just become a comic child character, he becomes the point where ancient danger touches the future. Suddenly, the movie is not only about survival, it is about protection. And Brendan Fraser plays that shift beautifully. On a first watch, Rick still feels like a Rick. He is still physical, sarcastic, fast thinking, and slightly overwhelmed by the madness around him. But there is a new edge in him. You can feel that when danger comes near his family, the comedy never fully cancels the fear. That balance is one of the reasons Fraser works so well in these films. He can make Rick funny without making him careless. He can make him heroic without making him cold. He can make panic look entertaining while still letting you believe the danger matters. Rachel Weisz gives the first act a different kind of pull. Evie feels more settled, more confident, and more mysterious this time. The movie starts planting the idea that her connection to ancient Egypt may not only be academic. On first watch, that adds curiosity. You feel that something inside her is being awakened, but the film does not immediately explain it all. That creates a quiet tension under the spectacle. Evie is not only reading history anymore, history seems to be reading her back. That is a strong emotional idea, and the first watch picks up on it even before the story fully opens. There is something haunting about seeing a character who once loved ancient history begin to feel ancient history inside her own life. It turns her passion into danger. It turns knowledge into identity, and it makes the sequel feel like the past has become personal in a way the first film only hinted at. The atmosphere is also different because The Mummy Returns mixes domestic comfort with supernatural invasion. The early scenes around the O'Connell family have an almost playful adventure house feeling. Their world is filled with artifacts, jokes, movement, and the sense that this family treats danger like a strange part of everyday life. But then the film lets ancient forces break into that space. That is when the movie becomes exciting. It takes the safety of home and proves that even home is not outside the reach of a curse. That is the moment the first watch starts to lock in. You realize the movie is not going to keep the danger far away in ruins and tombs. It is going to bring it into streets, museums, houses, trains, and family life. The ancient world is not staying in the desert, it is spreading into the modern world, and that gives the film a bigger playground. The first 10 minutes hook you because they promise motion. They promise that this will not be a slow mystery, this will be a chase through mythology. A bracelet becomes more than an artifact, a vision becomes more than a dream, a child's curiosity becomes more than a mistake. And suddenly every object in the movie feels like it might be a key, a trap, or a warning. That is classic adventure cinema. The best objects in these stories are never just objects. They carry threat, they carry history, they carry instructions nobody fully understands until it is too late. The bracelet of Anubis works because it is visually simple but narratively huge. On first watch, you understand it immediately. This thing matters, and because it matters, everyone dangerous will want it. The movie also becomes hard to look away from because it keeps changing environments. It refuses to stay still. London gives way to pursuit. Pursuit gives way to travel. Travel gives way to desert mythology. The editing rhythm pushes you forward before you can start questioning too much. That can be a weakness later, because the film sometimes moves so fast that emotional beats do not breathe long enough. But as a first watch experience, the speed is part of the thrill. It feels like the movie is grabbing your hand and saying, "Do not stop now, the next door is already opening." And honestly, that is why The Mummy Returns remains so rewatchable for many people. It gives you the feeling of a Saturday adventure serial with a blockbuster budget. It has danger but not despair. It has danger but not hopelessness. It has monsters but not hopelessness. It has monsters but also humor. It has ancient curses but also family warmth. It is big, messy, energetic, and completely committed to its own sense of fun. The first watch feeling is not perfection, it is momentum. It is the feeling of sand shifting under your feet, of history waking up too quickly, of a family being pulled into a story too large for them, and of a sequel trying to prove that the box we opened the first time had another box hidden underneath it. And now, to understand why that feeling works visually, we need to look at how the film is actually built on screen. The visual language of The Mummy Returns is built around one simple idea: motion should feel like discovery. This is not a film that wants the camera to sit still and quietly observe ancient mythology from a distance. It wants the camera to move like it has found a secret passage. It wants scenes to feel pushed forward by wind, sand, fire, footsteps, weapons, trains, doors, maps, and panic. The filmmaking is not subtle, but it is very intentional. Everything is designed to make the world feel unstable, as if history itself is constantly shifting under the characters. Look at the way the film moves between London and Egypt. London is shot with a sense of polished adventure fantasy. The O'Connell home feels warm, wealthy, crowded with artifacts, and almost too alive with history. It is not a normal house. It feels like a private museum where every object could become a plot point. That production design choice is important because it tells you something about Rick and Evie before the story even fully begins. They did not leave adventure behind. They built a life around it. Their home is comfortable. It is also full of danger waiting to be recognized. The lighting in those early London scenes often gives the interiors a golden antique quality. The space feels touched by old walls. That matters because the film is visually connecting domestic life to ancient mystery. Dick and Evie are not living in a clean modern space that separates them from the past. They are surrounded by relics. They sleep near history. They raise their child inside the evidence of everything they once survived. So when the supernatural enters their home, it does not feel random. Visually, the house was already inviting the past in. Then the film moves into museums and public spaces, and the visual texture changes. The British Museum material carries a colder, more formal atmosphere. Stone, glass shadow, and display cases create the feeling of history being controlled, labeled, and contained. But the movie's central idea is that history cannot be contained. So when danger erupts in that space, the contrast works. The museum is supposed to be a place where dead civilizations are safely studied. The film turns it into a place where the dead can answer back. That is one of the smartest visual ideas in the movie. The Mummy Returns understands that adventure cinema becomes more exciting when safe places become unsafe. A home becomes vulnerable. A museum becomes a ritual chamber. A city becomes a chase route. A train becomes a moving battlefield of tension. The film keeps transforming spaces, and that transformation gives the action rhythm. The camera work is mostly energetic and direct. Sommers favors movement that keeps the audience oriented inside chaos. Even when the action becomes busy, the film usually wants you to understand where the characters are going and what they are trying to escape. That is important because this movie has a lot of moving pieces. If the camera became too abstract, the story would collapse into noise. Instead, many scenes use clear forward momentum. Characters running down corridors, crossing rooms, climbing vehicles, racing through streets, or moving toward a visible destination. That clarity is one reason the action still plays well. The film is not always realistic, but it understands action geography. You often know what the characters want, what is chasing them, and what space they have to survive. The editing is fast, but it usually has a playful rhythm rather than a punishing one. It cuts to accelerate panic, not to hide the scene. That difference matters. The action is meant to be fun, not exhausting. The color palette also works in broad emotional zones. London has warmth mixed with shadow. It feels lived in, old, and slightly theatrical. Egypt and the desert material lean into sun, sand, gold, stone, and heat. These colors are not just pretty adventure colors, they create a mythic feeling. The desert becomes a place where human scale shrinks. People look small against the landscape, and that makes the ancient forces feel larger. The more the characters move toward the center of the myth, the more the film's visual world becomes elemental: sand, fire, sky, stone, water, and darkness. That elemental quality is key to the film style. The Mummy Returns is not interested in realism in the strict sense, it is interested in legendary texture. Temples are lit like sacred traps. Ancient chambers feel designed for prophecy. The underworld imagery has a theatrical darkness that makes it feel closer to a fantasy painting than a historical reconstruction. That is exactly the point. The film is using history as a doorway into myth, not as a documentary surface. The production design constantly supports that. Objects have weight because they are treated like keys. The bracelet of Anubis is framed not as a small accessory but as a device that can bend the entire plot. The film gives it close attention. It lets you understand its shape, its placement, and its danger. In adventure cinema, this is essential. The audience has to believe that an object matters before characters start risking everything for it. The film streaming does that work quickly. It turns the bracelet into a ticking clock you can see. The editing rhythm is also built around escalation. Scenes rarely end by relaxing. They end by pushing into the next complication. A discovery creates a chase. A chase reveals a clue. A clue points to a location. A location opens a threat. This makes the film feel breathless, and while that can hurt the emotional depth at times, it gives the movie a very specific engine. It feels like a chain reaction. Once the box opens, every hidden mechanism inside it starts moving. The visual effects are more complicated to discuss. Some of them still have charm and energy. Imhotep's transformations, the sand-based supernatural imagery, and many of the creature concepts fit the pulpy tone of the film. They are not trying to be quiet or invisible. They are trying to feel magical and dangerous. But the film also reaches beyond what early 2000s digital creature work could always support convincingly. That is especially visible when the movie tries to combine human performance, monster anatomy, and full digital movement in one image. The ambition is clear, but the weight is not always there. Still, even when the effects age, the film's overall visual imagination remains strong. The ideas are memorable. Armies rising from myth, desert landscapes becoming supernatural battlefields, a warrior legend turning into a monstrous final threat. These are big images. They stay in the mind because they are bold. The movie may not always execute every image perfectly, but it knows how to create icons. The sound and music also shape the cinematic experience. The score gives the film that sweeping adventure identity: big, emotional, dangerous, and romantic. It helps the movie move from comedy to threat without losing its tone. The sound design gives ancient mechanisms, curses, creatures, and battles a heightened quality. Everything feels larger than normal life. Doors do not simply open, they reveal fate. Sun does not simply move, it carries warning. Weapons do not only clash, they echo like pieces of old history colliding. And that is the technical soul of The Mummy Returns. It is a film built from speed, scale, texture, and theatrical confidence. The camera moves because the story moves. The color shifts because the world shifts. The lighting turns history into atmosphere. The editing turns mythology into a chase. The effects turn ambition into spectacle, even when they show their age. Every technical choice is pushing toward the same feeling. The past is awake, and it is moving faster than anyone can control. Now that the box is open visually, it is time to walk through the story itself, not as a dry summary, but as a living adventure where every choice pulls Rick, Evie, Alex, and a world closer to something ancient and dangerous. The story begins far before Rick and Evie ever enter the picture, because The Mummy Returns wants us to understand that this is not only their adventure, it is a chain of ancient consequences. Long ago, the Scorpion King rises as a warrior of impossible ambition. He wants victory so badly that defeat becomes unbearable to him, and that is the first warning the film gives us. This is a world where human desire can become dangerous when it reaches beyond human limits. The Scorpion King is not simply a fighter. He is a man who refuses to accept the boundary between strength and destruction. When his army is broken, when the desert itself seems to swallow his dream of conquest, he makes a bargain with a darker force. He accepts power, but power in this universe never arrives clean. It always asks for something back. That prologue matters because it sets the emotional rule of the movie. Ancient power does not solve human weakness, it magnifies it. Then we jump forward into the life of Rick and Evy O'Connell, and the contrast is immediately important. They are not desperate conquerors, they are not cultists, they are not people trying to rule the world. They are a family. They have built a life after surviving the impossible. Rick is still Rick, bold, sarcastic, quick to act before the situation has fully explained itself. Evie is still drawn to ancient mystery, but now her curiosity feels more personal, almost like something inside her is pulling her toward the past. And Alex, their son, brings a completely new energy into the story. He is clever, fearless in that dangerous way children can be, and just curious enough to make every ancient object in the room feel like a problem waiting to happen. The film understands that adventure often begins with curiosity. Not evil, not malice. Curiosity. That is how the bracelet enters the story. The bracelet of Anubis is discovered like an artifact, but it behaves like a trap. Once Alex becomes connected to it, the entire movie tightens. Suddenly, he is not just the child of the heroes. He is part of the mechanism. The bracelet gives him visions, directions, and a terrifying countdown toward a place where the Scorpion King's power can be awakened. That is a strong adventure device because it turns geography into suspense. Every location matters because time is running out. Every step forward brings the characters closer to rescue, but also closer to something much worse. At the same time, Imhotep's followers are moving in the shadows. This is where the sequel begins to mirror the first film, but with greater organization. In the first movie, Imhotep's return feels like a disaster released by accident. Here, his return is planned. People want him back. They worship him, fear him, and believe he can give them access to a greater power. That changes his presence. Imhotep is not only an ancient monster returning from punishment, he is now the chosen weapon of people who think they understand what they are summoning. They do not. That is one of the oldest mistakes in adventure cinema. Someone finds a force older than morality and assumes it can be controlled. The Mummy Returns repeats that idea again and again. The cultists believe Imhotep can be used. Imhotep believes the Scorpion King's power can be taken. The Scorpion King once believed the power of Anubis could secure his victory. Everyone who reaches for supernatural control is already standing at the edge of their own collapse. When Imhotep returns, the film gives him a different kind of emotional charge. He is still dangerous, still elegant, still driven by obsession, but this time the story gives him Anck-su-namun again. That relationship is central to his tragedy. It is not love in a healthy sense. It is fixation. It is desire preserved beyond death until it becomes something unnatural. Imhotep is terrifying not only because of what he can do, but because he has spent thousands of years unable to let go. His heart is trapped in one moment, one woman, one old betrayal, one fantasy of restoration, and that makes him a dark reflection of the heroes. Rick and Evie are also defined by love, but their love is alive. It grows, it creates family, it protects, it changes them. Imhotep's love does the opposite. It freezes him, it turns him backward. It makes him tear open the world to recreate something that should have ended long ago. The movie may not stop to say this directly, but the contrast is everywhere. One love builds a future. The other keeps digging up the past. As Alex is taken, the film shifts into rescue mode, and this is where the momentum really begins. Rick and Evie are no longer investigating from a distance. They are chasing their son through a supernatural puzzle that is already moving faster than they can understand. The story becomes a race across clues, visions, and locations, with Alex forced into the strange role of both captive and guide. He is in danger, but he is also smart enough to survive moments that would break most adults. That keeps the film from making him helpless. He is frightened, yes, but he is also his parents' child. He watches, calculates, delays, and uses his wit wherever he can. That matters because it keeps the family dynamic alive even when they are separated. Rick and Evie are trying to reach him. Alex is trying to stay alive long enough to be reached. The film turns family into action from both directions. Meanwhile, Evie's visions begin to open another layer. She is not just remembering facts from ancient history. She is seeing pieces of a life that connects her to Princess Nefertiti, while Anck-su-namun's return gives the villain side its own mirrored past. This is one of the sequence's biggest swings. The first film made Evie's knowledge valuable. The sequel makes her identity mythological. That choice can feel dramatic, maybe even too convenient, but it also gives the movie a larger emotional frame. Evie is not simply caught in the story. She belongs to a story that began before her current life. This is where The Mummy Returns becomes a reincarnation drama inside an action blockbuster. The film is saying that some conflicts do not end when the bodies disappear, they echo, they return through memory, desire, symbols, and bloodlines. Evie and Anck-su-namun are not just rivals in the present, they are connected through an older wound. Their conflict carries the weight of something unfinished. Rick too is pulled into a deeper destiny. His connection to the Magi and the Ancient Order is revealed gradually, giving him a symbolic role beyond being the tough adventurer with weapons and courage. This is a risky choice, because part of Rick's charm in the first film came from his rough simplicity. He was not a chosen one figure. He was just the man brave enough, unlucky enough, and stubborn enough to survive the curse. By giving him a larger destiny, the sequel makes him more mythic, but it also changes the flavor of the character. Still, Brendan Fraser keeps him grounded. Rick may have ancient marks and hidden significance, but he never starts acting like a distant legendary figure. He remains practical. He remains emotional. He remains a father first. That is why the Destiny material does not fully swallow the character. Rick's deepest motivation is not prophecy, it is Alex. As the chase continues, Jonathan brings the comic survival energy that the series needs. He often appears selfish, nervous, or opportunistic, but the film knows how to use him. Jonathan works because he brings ordinary weakness into a story full of heroic and supernatural extremes. He is the person who looks at ancient doom and reacts like a normal person might react, with fear, bargaining, panic, and a surprising ability to still be useful at exactly the right time. He gives the story air. Without him, the mythology could become too heavy. With him, the movie remembers that this is still supposed to be fun. Ardeth Bay also returns as the serious guardian of the larger myth. He carries the weight of the Magi, the ancient responsibility to keep these powers from rising again. His role is important because he reminds us that the O'Connells are not the only people affected by this story. There are entire groups, histories, and duties built around preventing this exact disaster. That makes the world feel older and wider. When he speaks about the danger, the film gains scale. The threat is not just personal, it is civilizational. Then the movie keeps escalating. The bracelet's visions guide Alex toward the oasis and the pyramid. Imhotep's forces push forward. Rick and Evie follow with increasing desperation. The closer everyone gets to the destination, the more the adventure starts to feel like a collision course. And that is the engine of the middle section. Different forms of desire racing toward the same place. Rick and Evie want their son back. Alex wants to survive. Imhotep wants the Scorpion King's power. Anck-su-namun wants restoration and security through that power. The cultists want domination. The Magi want to prevent catastrophe. Every major character group is moving toward one location, but they are not moving for the same reason. That is what gives the story its pressure. The destination means something different to everyone. As the film enters its final stretch, the oasis appears almost like a hidden world inside the world. It is beautiful, but it is not safe. That is a strong adventure image, paradise covering a trap. The lushness of the location makes the danger feel more mythic. After so much sand, heat, and pursuit, the oasis should feel like relief. Instead, it feels like the mouth of something ancient. The film uses that contrast well. Beauty becomes warning. Evy's journey reaches one of its most emotional turns when her connection to the past becomes fully active in the present conflict. Her strength is not only intellectual anymore, she has to fight for her family with every part of herself mind, memory, courage, and body. This is important because Evy's arc in the sequel is not simply about becoming more physically capable. It is about integrating who she was, who she is, and who she chooses to be now. The past may be inside her, but it does not own her. That is a major difference between Evie and Imhotep. He is consumed by the past. She learns from it without surrendering her present identity. When tragedy strikes the family, the film briefly slows enough to show that the adventure has real emotional cost. This is one of the moments where the movie's tone becomes delicate. It is still a pulpy blockbuster, but it allows grief to enter the frame. Rick's reaction matters because it strips away the jokes and the bravado. Underneath everything, he is a man terrified of losing the people he loves. The best Rick moments are not only the action beats, they are the moments where his courage becomes helpless for a second, where he cannot punch the problem away. But because this is The Mummy Returns, death and life are not simple borders. The story has always been about returns, and the emotional return becomes just as important as the villain's supernatural return. The film uses resurrection not only as horror, but as hope. That is part of its fantasy logic. The same world that can bring back monsters can also give love one more chance. It is sentimental, yes, but in this kind of story, sentiment is part of the spell. The final confrontation brings all the threads together. Rick versus the Scorpion King's power, Imhotep's ambition collapsing under the weight of his own obsession, Anck-su-namun revealing the limits of her loyalty, and the family fighting to survive the consequences of every ancient bargain that came before them. The movie turns the ending into a test of love. Not romantic words, not grand speeches, but action. Who reaches out? Who saves? Who runs? Who abandons? Who stays? That contrast becomes the emotional center of the climax. Rick and Evie's love is proven through sacrifice and loyalty. Imhotep's love is exposed as fragile because it depends on possession and return, not selfless devotion. When he finally sees that the person he has destroyed so much for may not stand by him in the same way, the tragedy of his character becomes clear. He is powerful but not truly loved in the way he imagined. He crossed death for a dream that cannot hold him. And that is why the ending works better emotionally than some of its visual effects do. The spectacle may be uneven, but the emotional comparison is strong. The heroes survive because their bond moves forward. The villain falls because his bond pulls him backward. The family escapes because they choose each other in the present. The ancient threat collapses because its entire foundation is built on old hunger, old conquest, and old obsession. By the time the adventure resolves, The Mummy Returns has completed the shape it promised from the beginning. It took a family, placed them inside an ancient countdown, surrounded them with returning enemies and buried legends, and forced them to prove that love connected to the future is stronger than love trapped in the past. The movie ends with the feeling that the O'Connells have survived not just another monster, but another claim the past tried to make on their lives. Their world will probably never be normal. How could it be? They have seen too much, opened too much, awakened too much. But that is also part of their charm. Some families go on holidays. This family accidentally ends up in the middle of supernatural history, and somehow they keep coming back. The story of The Mummy Returns is messy, crowded, sometimes too fast, and often completely outrageous. But it has a clean emotional spine. A child is taken, parents chase him, ancient power rises, old love fails, living love endures. That is the adventure under the spectacle. And this is the moment the box opens completely. What The Mummy Returns does brilliantly is understand that adventure needs personality before it needs perfection. That is the first reason the film still works. The plot is busy, the mythology is crowded, the visual effects are uneven in places. But the characters carry the movie with such clear energy that you keep following them. This is a film where charm becomes structure. Rick, Evie, Alex, Jonathan, Ardet, Imhotep, each one brings a different flavor to the ride, and that variety keeps the story alive even when the movie is racing through too many ideas at once. Brendan Fraser commands the screen because he plays Rick O'Connell like a man who can survive impossible danger without ever becoming emotionally blank. That is harder than it looks. A lot of adventure heroes become either too serious or too smug. Jake avoids both traps. He is strong, but he can be scared. He is funny, but he is not careless. He is brave, but he is not invincible. And in this sequel, Fraser adds something deeper: fatherhood. The scene that proves it is any moment where Rick's focus turns completely toward Alex. His whole body language changes. The jokes become sharper because they are covering fear. The action becomes more urgent because the mission is no longer abstract. He is not chasing treasure. He is not trying to impress anyone. He is trying to get his son back. That makes Rick more human. His heroism is not based on destiny, even when the script gives him a destiny. His heroism is based on loyalty. He moves because someone he loves needs him. Rachel Weisz is just as essential. Evie could have easily become a side character in a sequel this large, but Weisz gives her warmth, intelligence, and mystery. She makes Evie feel like someone whose curiosity has matured into confidence. The film gives her a more physical role, but what works best is not simply that she fights more. It is that her connection to the past feels emotional. Her visions, her memories, and her ancient identity could have become silly if played without sincerity. Weiss gives those moments belief. She lets Evie feel amazed, frightened, and pulled towards something she does not fully understand. That is why Evie remains the heart of the mythology. Rick is the engine of rescue, but Evie is the doorway into meaning. Through her, the film turns ancient Egypt from a setting into a memory. She makes the supernatural feel personal. And when she stands opposite Anck-su-namun, the conflict is not only good against evil. It becomes two versions of womanhood inside the film's myth, one connected to love, family, and courage, the other connected to ambition, fear, and self-preservation. Arnold Vosloo also deserves real credit because Imhotep remains fascinating even when the sequel gives him a more crowded stage. He is not just a roaring monster. He carries sadness, arrogance, hunger, and ancient exhaustion. He feels like someone who has been punished so long that obsession is the only thing keeping him alive. That makes him more interesting than a simple villain. You do not support him, but you understand the wound that drives him. His best moments are not the loudest ones. They are the quiet looks where you can see that everything he wants is built on a fantasy that reality may not honor. And then there is John Hannah as Jonathan, who is one of the film's secret weapons. Comedy in adventure films can be dangerous because it can break tension if used badly. But Jonathan works because he represents human weakness in a world full of grand destiny. He is greedy, nervous, dramatic, and often ridiculous, but he is not useless. That is the key. The movie lets him be funny while still allowing him to matter. It reminds you that not everyone in an adventure story has to be noble all the time. Sometimes survival itself is a skill. The story construction works best as a chase narrative. Once Alex puts on the bracelet, the film gains a clear forward line. The countdown begins. The map begins to move. The villains have a destination. The heroes have a rescue mission. The Magi have a larger responsibility. This gives the movie momentum even when the mythology gets complicated. You may not remember every rule perfectly, but you understand the pressure. A child must reach a place before time runs out, and everyone is racing toward the same final point for different reasons. That structure is effective because it keeps the film from becoming only exposition. The story explains a lot, but it rarely stops completely. Information arrives during movement. Clues come through visions, chases, discoveries, and confrontations. The film understands that in a pulpy adventure, the audience wants mystery, but not stillness. It keeps the box opening while the characters are already running through it. Direction and visuals also work because the film knows its own tone. The Mummy Returns is not trying to be a realistic historical drama, it is trying to be a supernatural adventure serial with blockbuster scale. That confidence matters. The temples are dramatic, the lighting is theatrical, the desert is mythic, the objects glow with importance, the villains enter like legends. The camel treats everything as slightly larger than life, and that is exactly the right choice for this story. The London sequence is especially strong because it brings ancient danger into a modern location without losing the adventure atmosphere. The city does not feel separate from the mythology. It becomes another chamber in the tomb. That is a brilliant expansion of the franchise's world. The first film mostly made the desert feel dangerous. The sequel says the curse can travel. It can enter your house, it can move through museums, it can chase you through streets. That widens the threat and makes the adventure feel less contained. The music and sound do a lot of emotional work. The score gives the film sweep and movement. It knows when to be romantic, when to be ominous, and when to push the action forward with full adventure energy. Without that musical identity, some of the film's bigger moments might feel too chaotic. The score gives them shape. It tells you when to feel wonder, when to feel danger, and when to feel the old magic rising again. The sound design also helps sell the supernatural world. Ancient mechanisms do not sound ordinary. They feel heavy, secretive, and dangerous. Creatures arrive with exaggerated presence. Sand, stone, fire, and metal all feel like part of the mythology. That matters because a film like this depends on texture. You need to feel the world even when you do not fully believe every image. Sound helps create that belief. The one scene that feels completely unforgettable is the emotional contrast near the climax, where the film compares Rick and Evy's love with Imhotep and Anck-su-namun's. This is where the movie's deeper idea becomes clear without needing a lecture. Rick and Evy are defined by reaching for each other. Imhotep and Anck-su-namun are defined by the failure of that same gesture. One bond is built on sacrifice. The other collapses when sacrifice is required. That is powerful because it turns the climax into more than a fight. It becomes a judgment of the film's two central loves. That moment hits because the whole movie has been building toward it. Imhotep has crossed centuries for Anck-su-namun. He has torn open death, chased power, and risked everything for the dream of restoring what he lost. But when the truth of that love is tested, the fantasy breaks. Rick and Evy, meanwhile, are not ancient icons. They are messy, funny, frightened, living people, but their love is active. It does not only remember, it chooses, it reaches, it stays. That is where The Mummy Returns works best. Beneath the monsters, the chases, the jokes, and the spectacle, the film understands the difference between love that preserves the past and love that protects the future. The heroes win not because they are keener mythological figures, but because they are alive in the present. They care about each other now. They act now. They risk now. So yes, this movie is excessive. Yes, it sometimes tries to carry too much, but what it does brilliantly is give that excess a beating heart. It makes adventure feel emotional. It makes family feel heroic. It makes ancient mythology feel personal. And it gives you characters who are fun enough, sincere enough, and memorable enough to carry the whole storm. That is why the film still has power. Not because every piece is perfect, because the ride has soul where. The Mummy Returns falls short is exactly where it becomes most ambitious. That is the strange thing about this sequel. Its weaknesses do not come from a lack of imagination. They come from too much imagination fighting for space. The film wants to be a family rescue story, a reincarnation drama, a supernatural war movie, a monster sequel, a comedy adventure, a mythological origin story. And the franchise launched all at the same time. That gives the movie energy, but it also creates pressure. At certain points, you can feel the story trying to carry more weight than its structure can comfortably hold. The biggest issue is pacing. The film moves so fast that it sometimes mistakes speed for development. The first Mummy had momentum, but it also allowed mystery to breathe. You had time to feel the tomb, the curse, the fear, and the chemistry between the characters as it formed. The Mummy Returns is less patient. It often jumps from revelation to chase, from chase to vision, from vision to exposition, from exposition to another threat before the previous moment has fully landed. That does not destroy the movie because the ride is still entertaining, but it does weaken some emotional beats. When Evy's ancient connection becomes important, the idea is fascinating, but the film moves through it quickly. When Rick's larger destiny is revealed, it gives him mythic importance, but it does not always feel as deeply explored as it should. When Alice becomes central to the countdown, the stakes are clear, but the story sometimes uses him more as a plot device than as a fully developed child caught in a terrifying experience. Alex works because Freddy both gives him confidence and energy, and because the family dynamic is strong. But the script occasionally makes him almost too capable for the level of danger around him. He is clever, and that is fun. He is brave, and that fits the O'Connell bloodline. But there are moments where the danger would feel sharper if the movie allowed him to be more emotionally shaken. Children in adventure films can be resourceful, but fear can make them feel more real. The Mummy Returns sometimes chooses charm over vulnerability, and that slightly softens the threat. Another weakness is the mythology overload. The Scorpion King, the bracelet of Anubis, Imhotep's resurrection, Anck-su-namun's return, Evy's past life, Rick's Magi connection, the cultists, the oasis, the army of Anubis, the reincarnation conflict. All of these ideas are interesting on their own, but placed together, they can make the movie feel crowded. Instead of one clean supernatural problem, the film gives you a chain of connected legends. That can be exciting, but it can also make the rules feel loose. And when supernatural rules feel loose, tension becomes harder to control. The first film had a very clear central threat. Imhotep was returning to power, and the heroes had to stop him before he became unstoppable. The sequel adds more layers, but not all of them have equal emotional force. The Scorpion King is presented as massively important, yet for most of the movie he functions more like a destination than a character. He is a legend, a countdown, a final danger waiting at the end of the road. That works structurally, but emotionally he is thinner than Imhotep. Imhotep has desire, he has history. He has heartbreak twisted into obsession. The Scorpion King mostly has symbolic weight. Then there is the visual effects issue. It is impossible to discuss this film fairly without acknowledging that some effects have aged poorly. The final digital Scorpion King is the clearest example. The concept is memorable and the ambition is obvious, but the execution does not fully hold the illusion now. The creature does not always have the physical weight, facial realism, or lighting integration needed to make the climax feel as convincing as it should. Because this is the final thread the film has been building toward, that matters. The emotional stakes are strong, but the visual centerpiece can pull you out of the moment. Still, this criticism needs balance. The film was made at a time when digital effects were rapidly expanding and many blockbusters were still learning how far CGI could be pushed. So the problem is not that the movie had no ambition. The problem is that the ambition went beyond what the technology could consistently deliver. Some effects still worked because they matched the pulpy tone. Others expose the limits of the era. The film also has tonal unevenness. Most of the time, the comedy and danger blend well. That is part of the franchise's charm. But occasionally, the jokes arrive so close to serious moments that they reduce the emotional impact. Jonathan's humor is usually effective, and Rick's sarcasm is part of his identity. But the sequel sometimes seems afraid to let silence last. It keeps the energy high, but a few quieter moments would have made the emotional turns hit harder. Anck-su-namun is another missed opportunity. Patricia Velasquez gives the character presence, elegance, and danger, but the script could have explored her more deeply. Her connection to Imhotep is central to the climax, yet her inner life remains limited. We understand what she represents: desire, fear, betrayal, survival, but we do not get enough time inside her perspective. That makes her final choices thematically effective, but they could have been even more devastating if the movie had built her with more emotional complexity. The same is true for Evy's reincarnation arc. It is visually exciting and emotionally intriguing, but it deserved more space. The idea that Evy is connected to an ancient identity could have created a deeper conflict between memory and selfhood. Does she fear losing herself? Does she feel responsible for something that happened long before her current life? Does Rick understand what that means for her? The film touches the surface, but it rushes toward the next action beat before fully opening the question, and that is the pattern. The Mummy Returns has strong ideas, but not always enough patience. The flaws matter because they keep the movie from matching the clean magic of the first film. The first Mummy feels more balanced. This sequel feels bigger but less controlled. Yet these flaws do not erase the fun, they shape the experience. They make the movie feel like a treasure chest that has been overfilled until the lid barely closes. Some jewels fall out, some pieces clash, but the box still shines, so the honest verdict on its weaknesses is this: The Mummy Returns loses focus when it tries to turn every idea into a major event. It needed more breathing room, clearer mythology, stronger emotional development for certain characters, and a final visual threat that could fully match the build-up. But even when it stumbles, it rarely becomes boring. Its problems are the problems of a movie that wants to give you too much, not too little. And for this kind of adventure, that makes the flaws frustrating, but strangely forgivable. The best way to understand The Mummy Returns is to place it beside the adventure films it is secretly talking to. First, compare it to The Mummy from 1999 because that is the most important mirror. The first film is tighter. It has a cleaner mystery, a stronger sense of gradual discovery, and a better balance between horror, comedy, romance, and adventure. It lets the curves unfold with patience. You feel the danger growing step by step. The sequel does not have that same clean build. It begins already huge, then keeps getting larger. But here is what The Mummy Returns does that the first film does not. It turns the adventure into legacy. The first movie is about waking the past. The second is about the past coming for the family you build afterward. That gives the sequel a different emotional flavor. It may not be as elegant, but it is more personal in its stakes. The first film asks if Rick and Evy can survive the curse. The sequel asks if their child can survive the consequences of their world. That is a strong sequel move. Now compare it to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Both films are darker, louder sequels that lean into ancient artifacts, dangerous cults, child danger, underground worlds, and supernatural forces. Both movies also move with almost reckless energy. They are not gentle adventures. They throw the heroes into traps, rituals, chases, and mythic danger with very little rest. The difference is that Temple of Doom has a nastier edge. It feels more dangerous, more uncomfortable, more intense. The Mummy Returns is more playful. Even when the stakes are huge, the tone keeps inviting you to enjoy the ride. That is where The Mummy Returns becomes more accessible. It gives you danger without making the experience too grim. But it also falls short by comparison because Temple of Doom has a sharper nightmare identity. You remember its darkness as a mood. The Mummy Returns has more moving pieces, but less concentrated atmosphere. Then there is Raiders of the Lost Ark. That comparison is important because Raiders is almost the perfect model of adventure clarity. Every scene has purpose, every object matters, every chase reveals character. The supernatural element is mysterious, dangerous, and held back long enough to feel sacred. The Mummy Returns clearly belongs to the tradition Raiders helped define. Old maps, Ancient power, tough heroes, clever heroines, secret chambers, and villains who think history can be owned. But Raiders has restraint. The Mummy Returns has appetite. That is the difference. Raiders knows exactly when to stop adding. The Mummy Returns keeps adding until the box is overflowing. Sometimes that makes it exciting, sometimes it makes it weaker. Compared to Raiders, the sequel feels less disciplined. But compared to many later blockbusters, it still has something valuable, a real sense of handcrafted adventure personality. It may be chaotic, but it never feels empty. You can also compare it to Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest. Both are sequels that expand a successful first film into a larger mythology. Both bring back beloved characters, add more supernatural rules, deepen the villain world, and push the franchise towards something bigger than the original adventure. Dead Man's Chest is more polished in its long-form franchise setup, and its central villain has more emotional and visual consistency, but The Mummy Returns has a warmer family core. Its heart is simpler. Parents want their child back. That emotional line keeps the movie understandable even when the mythology gets crowded. What The Mummy Returns does better than many similar films is blend family, comedy, romance, and supernatural adventure without becoming embarrassed by any of it. It is sincere. That matters. The movie never acts like ancient curses are silly even when the characters make jokes around them. It never treats family love as boring even when it is surrounded by monsters and spectacle. It never makes Rick and Evy's marriage feel like a background detail. Their relationship is part of the action engine. Where it falls short by comparison is focus. The best adventure films usually have one clean central object or one clean central mystery. The Ark, the Sankara stones, the cursed gold, the first film's book and resurrection ritual. Here the bracelet, the Scorpion King, Imhotep, the army, the reincarnation art, and Rick's destiny are all competing for attention. The film remains entertaining, but it does not always know which idea deserves the strongest spotlight. If you love The Mummy Returns, the obvious next watch is The Mummy from 1999, because that is where the chemistry and tone are at their purest. After that, Raiders of the Lost Ark is essential if you want the cleanest version of archaeological adventure cinema. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is also a strong follow-up because it shares that mixture of family stakes, ancient mystery, humor, and emotional payoff. If what you loved most was the supernatural pirate-like energy of curses and mythic villains, then Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl gives you a similarly playful balance of danger, comedy, and charm. But if The Mummy Returns did not work for you because it felt too crowded or too digitally heavy, then watch Raiders instead for precision, or The Mummy 1999 for a better controlled version of the same world. If you wanted a darker adventure with more danger and less family warmth, Temple of Doom may hit harder. And if you wanted a modern mythic blockbuster with cleaner effects and stronger world building, Dead Man's Chest may feel more satisfying. Still, The Mummy Returns has its own lane. It is not the best adventure film in the box. It is not even the cleanest film in its own franchise. But it is one of those sequels that understands the pleasure of going bigger, even when bigger becomes messy. It gives you the feeling of a movie made by people who wanted the screen to be full of sand, fire, history, jokes, monsters, romance, and impossible danger. And sometimes that is exactly what you want from an adventure sequel. Not perfection. A ride. The Mummy Returns arrived in a very specific blockbuster moment. It came out on May 4, 2001, at the edge of a new Hollywood decade, when studios were pushing harder into franchise filmmaking, digital spectacle, sequel expansion, and global adventure brands. This was before superhero cinema fully took over the summer calendar, before shared universes became the dominant studio dream, before every successful genre film was expected to become a massive interconnected machine. But you can already feel that future forming inside this movie. The Mummy Returns is not just a sequel, it is a sequel trying to become a launchpad. That context matters because in 2001, audiences were hungry for big screen escapism. They wanted scale, they wanted speed, they wanted stories that could fill a theater with sound, movement, danger, and spectacle. and The Mummy Returns understood that appetite almost perfectly. It did not arrive as a quiet continuation of the first film. It arrived like a summer event. Big opening, big monsters, big effects, big family stakes, big franchise energy. Commercially, that strategy worked. The film opened at number 1 in North America with about $68.1 million and went on to earn about $435.9 million worldwide against a reported $98 million production budget. Those numbers explain why the movie felt so important to Universal at the time. It proved that the 1999 Mummy was not only a one-time nostalgia hit. There was real audience demand for this world, these characters, and this style of adventure. But here's where it gets interesting. Critics and audiences did not receive the movie the same way. Critically, The Mummy Returns was met with mixed reaction. Rotten Tomatoes currently lists a 46% tomato score from 142 critic reviews, with the critical consensus arguing that the film's special effects are impressive, but the characters can feel secondary to the computer-generated imagery. Metacritic also frames the response as mixed, listing the film's release details and award summary, while reflecting a more divided critical conversation around its scale, speed, and CGI-heavy storytelling. And honestly, you can understand that reaction. If you are watching this in 2001 as a critic, you are seeing a sequel that often chooses more over balance. More creatures, more myth, more action, more exposition, more digital scale. For some critics, that made the film feel like a machine built to overwhelm the charm of the original. The Fast Mummy had old-fashioned adventure texture. The sequel sometimes looked like Hollywood testing how much CGI spectacle an adventure story could hold before the human pieces started to feel squeezed. But audiences were more forgiving. Rotten Tomatoes lists a 63% popcorn meter score from more than 250,000 ratings, and that gap tells you something important. This is one of those films where theatrical pleasure and critical judgment split apart. Critics saw the clutter, audiences felt the ride, critics noticed the machinery. Audiences remembered the family, the jokes, the desert, the bracelet, the chases, and the feeling of being thrown into a supernatural adventure with characters they already loved. That difference is the cultural story of The Mummy Returns. It was not built to be elegant. It was built to be satisfying in the moment. It wanted to give a 2001 summer crowd the feeling that the screen was packed with value. And in that era, that mattered. A blockbuster ticket needed to feel like an event. You had to walk out feeling that you had seen something bigger than television, bigger than normal life, bigger than what could fit inside a quiet drama. The Mummy Returns understood the assignment. It also arrived during a turning point for visual effects. Hollywood had already seen digital creatures and digital environments reshape blockbuster filmmaking in the 1990s, but the early 2000s was still a learning period. The Mummy Returns sits right inside that transition. Some of its effects were exciting at the time, some became dated quickly, and some became part of the film's strange legacy. The digital Scorpion King especially became a symbol of early CGI ambition outrunning believability. But that is also why the film feels so tied to its era. You can see Hollywood reaching forward even when the reach is too long. Awards-wise, this was not the kind of film that became a major prestige contender, and it was never trying to be. Its recognition lived more in genre and youth-oriented spaces. Metacritic's awards listing notes teen choice recognition, nominations from the Academy of Science Fiction, fantasy and horror films, and stunt award attention, which makes sense for a film defined by action, fantasy, visual effects, and audience-friendly spectacle. What did it deserve? Not major drama awards, not screenplay awards, but it deserved recognition for sustaining a very difficult tone. That is something awards bodies rarely honor properly. The Mummy Returns has to be funny, romantic, frightening, family-friendly, supernatural, mythological, and action-heavy, without falling apart completely. That balance is not easy. Even when the film becomes messy, the tonal confidence is real. And Alan Silvestri's music deserves special mention because the score helps give the film emotional lift and adventure identity. Without that musical sweep, the movie's excess would feel much flatter. The streaming and second wave life of The Mummy Returns is also important. Over time, the film became less about opening weekend records and more about nostalgia. It lived through DVD, cable, television reruns, digital rentals, streaming rotations, YouTube tips, fan edits, and online conversations about Brendan Fraser adventure hero charisma. Rotten Tomatoes now even lists the 25th anniversary theatrical re-release date of March 27, 2026, which shows how the franchise's early 2000s nostalgia continues to have commercial life long after its original run, and that second life changed how people talk about the movie. In 2001, the flaws were easier to attack because the movie was being measured as the newest expensive studio sequel. Years later, people often watch it differently. They see the practical charm around the digital rough edges. They see the chemistry. They see the comfort food adventure feeling. They see a kind of blockbuster that Hollywood does not make in exactly the same way anymore. Sincere, pulpy, romantic, goofy, and completely unashamed of being fun. Does it feel timeless? Not fully. The Mummy Returns is deeply of its era. You can feel early 2000s CGI. You can feel the sequel logic of that moment. You can feel a studio desire to turn a hit into a bigger mythology and a spin-off path. But emotionally, parts of it do feel timeless. A parent chasing a child, a family protecting each other, a villain destroyed by obsession, a past that refuses to stay buried. Those ideas do not age the same way effects do. So the cultural context of The Mummy Returns is this. Critics saw a sequel overloaded by spectacle, while audiences found a fast, generous adventure with characters they loved. Its technology aged, but its charm survived. Its reputation may not have become cleaner over time, but it became warmer. And sometimes that is the more interesting legacy, not a film becoming perfect in hindsight, but a film becoming beloved because its imperfections now feel like part of its personality. The best fan theories around The Mummy Returns are not the ones that try to rewrite the whole movie. They are the ones that notice small emotional contradictions and ask whether those contradictions are actually clues. The first major theory is about Anck-su-namun abandoning Imhotep at the end. On the surface, the moment is simple. Imhotep reaches for her, and she chooses herself. But fans have debated whether that moment proves she never truly loved him, or whether she loved him only when love also meant power, survival, and restoration. That is a very different kind of love from Rick and Evy's. Rick and Evy risk themselves for each other because their bond is alive. Anck-su-namun's love seems tied to advantage. When Imhotep is powerful, he is worth following. When he becomes vulnerable, the fantasy breaks. Reddit discussions often frame this as the moment that exposes the imbalance between Imhotep's obsession and Anck-su-namun's self-preservation. That theory holds up because the film itself visually supports it. Imhotep's tragedy is not just that he loses a battle. It is that he finally sees the truth of the love he has been worshipping for thousands of years. He crossed death for someone who would not cross fear for him. That does not make Anck-su-namun a simple villain with no psychology. It makes her human in a darker way. She wants life. She wants power. She wants the benefits of devotion without the cost of sacrifice. And in a film built around mirrored relationships, that contrast is clearly intentional. The second big theory asks whether Evy's reincarnation arc creates a hidden explanation for something strange in the first movie. Fans often point out that Imhotep initially seems to mistake Evy for Anck-su-namun in the 1999 film, while The Mummy Returns later reveals Evy's past life connection to Nefertari, not Anck-su-namun. Some fans treat this as a continuity issue. Others try to explain it by saying Imhotep's body, senses, and mind were incomplete when he first returned, so he was reacting through desperation more than true recognition. This debate appears in fan discussions and even in goof-styled commentary around the movie's continuity. That theory is interesting because it changes how you see Imhotep. If he mistakes Evy because he is physically incomplete, then the moment becomes tragic and disturbing at the same time. He is not seen clearly. He is projecting the woman he lost onto the newest possible vessel. But if you read it as a continuity weakness, then it shows one of the sequel's risks. Expanding mythology after the fact can create tension with the original story. The theory does not fully solve the issue, but it gives the inconsistency an emotional angle. Imhotep is not driven by clarity, he is driven by hunger. The third theory is that Rick was never just lucky. In the first film, Rick feels like a rough survivor who stumbles into an ancient curse and somehow lives through it. But The Mummy Returns gives him a deeper connection to the Magi and the ancient fight against these forces. Some fans read this as proof that Rick's involvement was always destiny, not coincidence. According to that interpretation, the first film was not random error, it was the past quietly pulling the right people into place. This theory partly holds up, but it also creates a trade-off. It makes the franchise mythology bigger, but it slightly changes Rick's original appeal. Rick is powerful in the first movie because he feels ordinary in the best way. Brave, flawed, funny, stubborn, and human. Making him part of a larger ancient design gives him mythic weight, but it can also make him less accidental. The theory works best if you see destiny not as something that controls Rick, but as something that recognizes him after he has already proven who he is. He is not heroic because of the mark. The mark matters because he is heroic. The fourth theory focuses on Imhotep himself. Some fans argue that he is not the pure villain of the franchise, but a cursed man trapped inside punishment, grief, and supernatural hunger. That reading does not excuse what he does. It simply asks whether his evil is partly shaped by the curse placed on him and the unnatural condition of his return. Reddit fan theory discussions have explored the idea that Imhotep's monstrous behavior is tied to the ritual consequences around him, not only his personality. This theory holds up emotionally, but only to a point. Imhotep is tragic, yes. He suffers, yes. His love has been twisted by time, punishment, and obsession. But the film still frames his choices as dangerous and destructive. He repeatedly chooses restoration over peace, power over release, and possession over real love. So, the best version of this theory is not Imhotep is innocent. The best version is Imhotep is what happens when grief becomes entitlement. He is not evil because he loved. He is dangerous because he believes love gives him the right to break the world. The fifth theory is about the Scorpion King and the army of Anubis. Fans sometimes read his legend as a warning that mirrors every other character's temptation. The Scorpion King sells himself for victory. Imhotep risks everything for power and resurrection. The cultists believe they can control what should never be awakened. Even the heroes touch ancient objects without fully understanding them. Under this reading, the Scorpion King is not only a final boss, he is the film's central symbol, the cost of desperate bargaining. That theory is one of the strongest because it makes the movie's crowded mythology feel more connected. The bracelet, the army, Imhotep, Anubis, and the oasis all become parts of one idea. Power always comes with a claim. If you borrow from darkness, darkness comes back to collect. That is exactly what happens across the film. The past is not generous. It gives, then it takes. The fun theories that fall apart are usually the ones that try to make every coincidence part of a perfect hidden master plan. The Mummy Returns is not that kind of film. It is too pulpy, too fast, too openly emotional. Not every detail is secret code. Some details are simply sequel expansion. Some are shortcuts. Some are messy choices made in the name of speed and spectacle. But the best theories work because they deepen what is already there. They make Anck-su-namun's betrayal sharper. They make Imhotep's tragedy darker. They make Rick's destiny more layered. They make Evy's reincarnation arc more debatable. And they make the Scorpion King feel less like extra mythology and more like the film's warning label. Because underneath all the fun debate, the same question keeps returning: who is controlled by the past? And who is strong enough to move beyond it? The deeper layer of The Mummy Returns is not really about ancient curses. It is about what happens when the past refuses to accept that it is over. That idea is everywhere in the film. Imhotep cannot let go of a love that died thousands of years ago. Anck-su-namun returns with the same survival instinct that once shaped her choices. Evie begins to feel memories from a life that should not belong to her. Rick discovers that his own identity may be connected to something older than he imagined. Alex, a child who should represent the future, becomes trapped inside an ancient countdown. Even the Scorpion King is a figure from the past whose old bargain still threatens the present. So, beneath the spectacle, this is a film about inheritance, not inheritance as money or property. Inheritance as emotional weight, inheritance as history, inheritance as the things passed down before you are old enough to understand them. The O'Connell family does not simply inherit adventure, they inherit danger. They inherit danger. They inherit symbols, bloodlines, responsibilities, and enemies. Their family story becomes connected to a much older story, and the film keeps asking whether they can survive that connection without being consumed by it. That is what makes Alex so important. He is not only a child in danger, he is the future being grabbed by the past. When the bracelet of Anubis locks onto him, the image is simple but powerful. A child wears an ancient object, and suddenly his life is no longer fully his own. That is the fear underneath the adventure. What if history reaches forward and claims the next generation? What if the mistakes, obsessions, and ambitions of people long gone still have power over those who come after? That is not just fantasy, that is human. Every family carries stories from before. Some are beautiful, some are painful, some are never spoken directly, but they shape the way people live. The Mummy Returns turns that emotional truth into myth. The bracelet becomes a visible symbol of invisible inheritance. Alex did not create the curse. He did not make the bargain. He did not resurrect Imhotep. But he becomes caught in the consequences anyway. And that is how life often works. You can be born into the aftermath of choices you never made. Rick and Evie's response to that is what defines them. They do not run from the responsibility. They do not treat Alex as a piece of prophecy or a magical key. To them, he is their son first. That is the emotional difference between the heroes and the villains. The villains see people as vessels, tools, bodies, symbols, and doors to power. The heroes see people as people. That sounds simple, but it is the moral center of the film. Imhotep looks at love and turns it into possession. He wants Anck-su-namun back because he cannot accept loss. His tragedy is that he mistakes return for healing. He believes that if the past can be restored, then the wound will close. But the movie shows the opposite. The more he tries to resurrect what was lost, the more empty it becomes. His love does not grow, it repeats. And repetition without growth becomes a prison. That is why Imhotep is such a strong shadow figure for the film. He is not scary only because he has supernatural power. He is scary because he is emotionally frozen. Thousands of years pass, but he is still trapped inside the same desire. He has not learned from death. He has not become wiser through suffering. He has only become more committed to the same obsession. Rick and Evie are different because their love changes form. In the first film, their love is discovery. In the sequel, their love is commitment. It has become marriage, family, responsibility, and sacrifice. It is no longer only romantic tension. It is daily loyalty under impossible pressure. That gives the sequel its human meaning. Love is not proven by how intensely you remember someone. Love is proven by how you show up when they need you. That is why the climax matters on a thematic level. The film compares two relationships without needing to explain the comparison directly. Rick and Evie reach for each other. Imhotep and Anck-su-namun failed that same test. One relationship moves through fear toward sacrifice. The other collapses when sacrifice becomes necessary. In that moment, the film tells us what kind of love survives and what kind of love was only obsession wearing the mask of devotion. Here's where it gets layered. The Mummy Returns is also about identity. Evie's vision suggests that she is connected to Nefertiti, but the important question is not whether she has an ancient past. The important question is whether that past defines her completely. The movie gives her memory, symbolism, and old conflict, but she is still Evy. She is still a wife, a mother, a scholar, and a woman making choices in the present. That is powerful because it says history can explain you, but it does not have to own you. Rick's hidden connection works in a similar way. The mark and the destiny give him mythic importance, but they are not what make him heroic. He was already brave. He was already loyal. He was already willing to walk into danger for the people he loved. The ancient symbol does not create his character. It reveals that his character belongs in this fight. That is an important distinction. Destiny in this film is not a replacement for choice. It is a pressure placed on choice. Rick and Evie may be connected to older forces, but they still have to act. They still have to love. They still have to risk. They still have to decide what kind of people they are when the past comes calling. The Scorpion King adds another deeper warning. His story is about desperation. He wants victory so badly that he trades himself for power. That is the oldest danger in the film, the belief that power can save you from your own limits. But power without wisdom only creates a larger cage. The Scorpion King becomes a prisoner of the bargain he made. Imhotep becomes a prisoner of the love he cannot release. Anck-su-namun becomes a prisoner of self-preservation. The cultists become prisoners of ambition. The heroes survive because they are not chasing power for its own sake. They are chasing each other. That is why family is the real treasure in The Mummy Returns. Not the bracelet, not the pyramid, not the army, not the ancient magic. The real treasure is the bond that refuses to become selfish. The film may cover that idea with monsters and explosions, but the emotional core is clear. A family is tested by the weight of old history, and they survive because their love points forward. The past can be meaningful. It can teach. It can warn. It can explain. But when the past demands control over the present, it becomes dangerous. That is the deeper warning inside the movie. You can honor history without becoming trapped by it. You can remember loss without worshipping it. You can inherit a story without letting it write your ending. And that is why the final feeling of the film is not just relief, it is release. The box opens, the curse rises, the old powers return, and the family walks through all of it without surrendering their future. That is the heart of The Mummy Returns. The dead want the world back. The living fight to keep moving forward. The legacy of The Mummy Returns is complicated because it did two things at the same time. It proved that this version of The Mummy could become a bigger franchise, and it also showed the danger of making the franchise too big too quickly. That is the tension at the center of its influence. The first Mummy worked because it felt like a keen revival of classic adventure cinema. It brought back the spirit of old Hollywood monster movies and archaeological adventures, but gave them a fast, funny, romantic blockbuster shape. The Mummy Returns took that formula and expanded it mythology, bloodlines, reincarnation, armies, spin-off potential, and family legacy. In doing that, it helped turn the series from one strong adventure story into a larger fantasy universe. You can see its influence most clearly in the way the Scorpion King became more than a side legend. The character was introduced here as a mythic warrior tied to the army of Anubis, but the film's commercial success helped open the door for the Scorpion King spin-off. That matters because The Mummy Returns was not only continuing a story, it was testing whether one supporting myth could become its own movie. In modern franchise language, that feels normal. But at the time, this was part of Hollywood learning how to stretch successful adventure worlds sideways. And that is one of the film's most important franchise legacies. It helped show that a blockbuster sequel could function as both a continuation and a launchpad. The story brings back Rick, Evie, Imhotep, and the world people already loved, while also planting a new figure who could carry a separate brand. That is a very modern studio instinct. Today, audiences recognize that strategy instantly. A sequel introduces a character, gives them mythology, tests audience interest, and then builds outward. The Mummy Returns was doing that before cinematic universes became the dominant language of blockbuster filmmaking. But the film also became a warning, because expansion is not the same as depth. Adding more mythology can make a world feel larger, but it can also make the original magic harder to control. The Mummy Returns still has charm because the characters are strong and the adventure energy is alive. But you can feel the franchise beginning to carry more machinery. The first movie feels like a cursed treasure adventure. The sequel feels like a whole mythology engine. That engine is exciting, but it is also heavier. That lesson matters because many later blockbusters would face the same problem. They would take a simple, beloved first film and expand the lore until the characters had to compete with the world building. The Mummy Returns is not the worst example of that, not even close. But it is an early, visible example of the trade off. Bigger can be thrilling. Bigger can also blur the emotional focus. Its influence also lives in the kind of hero Rick O'Connell represents. Brendan Fraser's Rick is not a dark, tortured, silent action figure. He is warm, funny, physical, slightly chaotic, and deeply human. He can be heroic without losing softness. That kind of adventure hero has aged beautifully because modern blockbusters often struggle to balance strength with vulnerability. Rick works because he reacts like a person. He gets frustrated. He gets scared. He jokes when the situation is insane, but when his family is in danger, the sincerity comes through immediately. That legacy is important. The Mummy Returns help preserve a version of adventure heroism that is not built only on coolness. Rick is cool, but he is not trying to look cool every second. He is trying to survive. He is trying to protect his family. He is trying to process ancient supernatural madness while still being a husband and father. That is why fans kept loving him long after the effects aged. Character warmth lasts longer than digital spectacle. The film also influenced how people remember early 2000s blockbuster adventure. When people talk about movies from this era with affection, The Mummy Returns often becomes part of a larger nostalgia box, theatrical spectacle, practical sets mixed with early CGI, big orchestra scoring, sincere romance, comic side characters, and stories that were allowed to be strange without constantly explaining themselves through irony. It belongs to a time when adventure films could be goofy, scary, romantic, and mythic in one package. That is why its reputation has warmed for many viewers over time. When it first arrived, it was easy to compare it to the first movie and point out the flaws. The pacing is rougher, the CGI is more uneven, the mythology is busier. But years later, people also see what the movie gave them: energy, chemistry, family stakes, memorable villains, and a kind of unembarrassed fun that feels rarer now. Nostalgia does not erase the flaws, but it changes the emotional balance. The movie becomes less of a failed attempt at perfection and more of a beloved, overstuffed adventure. The Mummy Returns also shaped the franchise by raising expectations that every new entry had to be huge. That became difficult. Once you introduce armies of Anubis, reincarnated princesses, hidden destinies, and mythic warrior kings, where do you go next without becoming even more excessive? That is the sequel problem. It raises the ceiling, but it also raises the burden. The franchise after this point had to compete with its own scale. Still, for film history, The Mummy Returns matters because it represents a kind of blockbuster that sits between eras. It looks back to our classic adventure serials, old monster movies, and Indiana Jones style treasure cinema. But it also looks forward toward franchise expansion, CGI spectacles, spin off logic, and mythology heavy world building. It is both old fashioned and modern. That combination makes it fascinating. Its legacy is not that it perfected the adventure sequel, its legacy is that it captured the thrill and danger of making everything bigger. It gave the franchise a wider world, a family heart, a new mythic branch, and some unforgettable images. It also exposed the limits of access, especially when technology and story structure struggle to keep up with imagination, but that is why the film remains worth opening. It is a time capsule of ambition. It is a reminder that messy sequels can still have soul. And it proves that sometimes a movie's influence is not only found in what it did perfectly, but in what it dared to attempt. The Mummy Returns did not bury the past. It built a bigger tomb around it. Alright, Full spoilers from this point. If you haven't seen the film yet, close this now, go watch it, and come back when you're ready. Trust me, you'll want to experience it fresh. The biggest turning point in The Mummy Returns is that the sequel is not simply about Imhotep coming back. It is about several ancient stories returning at the same time and crashing into one family. The first major twist is the Scorpion King's legend. Long before Rick, Evie, and Alex are pulled into this adventure, the Scorpion King makes a desperate bargain after his army is defeated. He wants victory so badly that he accepts power from Anubis, and that choice turns him into a warning buried inside the film. He becomes proof that supernatural power never comes free. You may receive the strength you asked for, but the force that gives it will eventually own the result. That is why the bracelet of Anubis matters so much. It is not just an artifact. It is a key, a map, and a countdown. When Alex puts it on, he becomes connected to the route leading toward the Scorpion King's pyramid. The bracelet shows him visions of the places they must reach, but it also traps him inside the story. If he does not reach the pyramid before the time runs out, the consequences become fatal. This is the film's smartest adventure device because it turns a child's curiosity into the engine of the whole plot. The next major turn is Imhotep's resurrection. His followers do not bring him back by accident. They do it with purpose. They believe he can defeat the Scorpion King and command the army of Anubis. That makes Imhotep both a villain and a tool. He thinks he's returning to claim power and reunite with Anck-su-namun, but even his return is part of someone else's plan. This is what the movie keeps repeating. Everyone thinks they can control ancient power, and everyone is wrong. Then, the film reveals that Evie is connected to Princess Nefertiti, while Mila carries the return of Anck-su-namun. This is one of the sequel's boldest twists. It reframes the conflict as something that began thousands of years earlier. Evie's visions are not random. They are memories from another life, or at least echoes of a past identity reaching through her. That means Evy and Anck-su-namun are not simply modern enemies. They are old rivals, returning to finish a conflict that history never fully closed. This detail changes how you watch Evy. In the first film, her strength comes from knowledge. She reads, translates, studies, and understands what others ignore. In the sequel, the past is no longer only something she can read, it is something she can feel. That is why her arc matters. She is not becoming important because the script suddenly says so. She is becoming important because the movie's entire theme is about history refusing to stay buried. Rick's hidden connection is another major reveal. The symbol on his wrist connects him to the Magi and gives him a larger role in the ancient struggle. This is the sequel making Rick more mythic than he was in the first film. Some people like this twist because it makes the story feel bigger. Some people prefer Rick as an accidental hero. But the emotional truth still works because Rick never acts like prophecy is the reason he fights. He fights because Alex is in danger. Destiny may point at him, but fatherhood moves him. The kidnapping of Alex is where the film becomes fully personal. Imhotep and his followers need Alex because the bracelet is locked onto him. That turns the child into a living guide. But Alex is not written as completely helpless. He delays, tricks, observes, and pushes back where he can. He is clearly Rick and Evie's son, brave enough to be useful, reckless enough to be in trouble, and clever enough to survive longer than the villains expect. As the journey continues, the film hides one of its cleanest pieces of foreshadowing in plain sight. Every relationship is being prepared for the final test. Rick and Evie repeatedly choose each other and Alex. Jonathan may seem selfish, but he keeps coming through when it matters. Our death-base stays loyal to duty even when the scale becomes terrifying. Imhotep and Anck-su-namun meanwhile look passionate on the surface, but their bond is built on possession, ambition, and fear. The film is quietly asking when the moment comes, who will actually reach for someone else? Evy's death is the emotional shock that tests the family. The movie briefly removes its warm-esque character from the center of the story, and Rick's reaction makes the loss feel personal. This is not just a plot beat. It is the moment where the adventure stops being charming for a breath and becomes grief. Rick can fight monsters, soldiers, and cursed warriors, but he cannot simply punch death away. That helplessness gives the sequence weight. But because this story is called The Mummy Returns, return is built into its bones. Alex and Jonathan help bring Evie back, and the resurrection works as a direct contrast to Imhotep's return. Imhotep returns through obsession and ritual power. Evie returns through family love and desperate loyalty. Both come back from death, but the emotional meaning is completely different. One return is unnatural hunger, the other is restoration. The final pyramid sequence brings every major idea together. Imhotep enters believing he can defeat the Scorpion King, take command of Anubis' army, and become unstoppable. But then the powers he depends on are stripped away. This is important because the movie forces him to face battle without the supernatural advantages he usually hides behind. He wanted ultimate control, but control is taken from him at the exact moment he needs it most. Rick also enters that final conflict without full certainty, but he has something Imhotep does not have: a living reason to survive. He is not chasing conquest. He is trying to protect his family and stop an army from being unleashed. When he faces the Scorpion King, the fight is visually about survival, but thematically it is about rejecting the bargain that created the monster in the first place. The Scorpion King represents power gained through surrender to darkness. Rick defeats that threat, not because he wants the army, but because he wants to end the claim that power has over the world. The ending of the Scorpion King matters because once he is defeated, the army of Anubis collapses. That means the real danger was never just one warrior creature. It was the possibility that his power could be transferred, commanded, and released into the world. By stopping him, Rick prevents the ancient bargain from becoming a modern apocalypse. But the most important ending beat is not a battle, it is Imhotep's final emotional collapse. When the pyramid begins to fall apart and Imhotep is trapped, he reaches for Anck-su-namun. After everything he has done for her, after centuries of obsession, after death, resurrection, and betrayal of the natural world, this is the moment where his love is tested in its simplest form. Will she come back for him? She does not. She chooses herself and runs. Then the movie immediately contrasts that with Rick and Evie. Rick is in danger and Evie reaches for him. She does not calculate. She does not abandon. She does not protect herself first. She chooses him. That visual comparison is the heart of the entire film. Imhotep finally understands that the love he worshipped was not the love he imagined. Rick and Evie prove that real love acts when it costs something. Imhotep sees the difference, and that realization destroys him more deeply than the collapsing pyramid does. That is why his ending feels tragic even though he is the villain. He has done terrible things, and the film never asks us to excuse him. But in that final look, you see a being who has spent thousands of years chasing a fantasy. He believed his devotion would be returned with equal devotion. Instead, he discovers that he has built his entire afterlife around someone who will not reach back. So he lets himself fall, not only because he is defeated, but because the dream that kept him alive has finally broken. Anck-su-namun's end also fits the theme. She runs to save herself, but the path collapses around her. The film does not frame her survival instinct as strength. It frames it as emptiness. She refuses sacrifice, and there is nowhere left for her to go. In a movie about returning, she returns only to repeat the same self-preserving pattern, and that pattern destroys her. Jonathan's role in the ending gives the film one last touch of adventure comedy, but it also pays off his character. He may be greedy and ridiculous, but he is still part of the family system. His survival and accidental usefulness remind us that The Mummy Returns is not trying to become pure tragedy. It is still a poopy adventure, where even the coward can become important at the right moment. There is no traditional post-credit scene that changes the story or sets up another direct reveal. The real setup is already inside the movie itself. The Scorpion King's mythology became the seed for a spin-off, while the O'Connell family survival leaves the door open for more adventures. The film does not need a final hidden scene because the entire sequel already behaves like a franchise doorway. The hidden details become clearer on rewatch. The bracelet is not just a magical object. It is the past, physically attaching itself to the future. Evie's visions are not just exposition, They show memory behaving like destiny. Rick's mark is not just a plot twist, it turns his courage into something recognized by history. The Scorpion King is not just a monster at the end, he is the first example of the film's central warning about desperate bargains. And Imhotep's love story is not romantic in the healthy sense. It is obsession preserved until it becomes a curse of its own. My personal reaction to the ending is that it works emotionally even when the visual effects do not fully hold up. The digital Scorpion King may pull the eye in the wrong way now, and the climax can feel visually overloaded. But the emotional structure is strong. The movie understands that the final defeat should not only be about destroying a monster, it should reveal the truth of every bond in the story. Rick and Evy survive because they choose each other. Alex survives because his family refuses to let the past claim him. Imhotep falls because the past is all he has left. The Scorpion King is defeated because power without freedom is only another prison. That is what the ending means. The Mummy Returns is not saying the past has no value. Evy's knowledge matters. Artist's duty matters. Ancient warnings matter. But the film is saying that the past becomes dangerous when it demands ownership of the living. The heroes win because they do not worship the past. They learn from it, fight through it, and then choose the future. That is the final key inside the box. The dead return. The curses return. The old loves return. The ancient bargains return. But the family survives because their love is not trying to recreate yesterday. It is trying to protect tomorrow. So after opening the full box, after the sandstorms, the resurrections, the family danger, the ancient bargains, the Scorpion King, the return of Imhotep, and the emotional mirror between two very different kinds of love, my personal rating for The Mummy Returns is 6.3 out of 10. And that rating may sound modest for a movie this entertaining, but it feels right. Because The Mummy Returns is not a clean masterpiece. It is not as tight as The Mummy from 1999. It does not have the same elegant balance of mystery, horror, comedy, romance, and adventure. It reaches for more, and because it reaches for more, it also drops more along the way. The mythology gets crowded. Some emotional ideas need more breathing room. Some visual effects have aged in a way that pulls you out of the illusion. And the final act, while emotionally strong, does not always look as convincing as the story wants it to feel. But here's the thing. A 6.3 does not mean this movie is forgettable. It means this is a flawed adventure with real charm, real energy, and real personality. It is a movie that still knows how to entertain. It still knows how to make you care about Rick and Evy. It still understands why ancient curses, forbidden objects, secret histories, and impossible rescue missions can feel so exciting. And even when the movie becomes too much, there is something lovable about how completely it commits to being too much. This is exactly who should watch The Mummy Returns. Anyone who loves old school adventure with supernatural flavor. If you enjoy movies where the heroes run through temples, decode ancient mysteries, fight impossible enemies, and still make time for humor and family warmth, this film gives you that feeling from beginning to end. If you love Brendan Fraser's Rick O'Connell, this sequel gives you a stronger fatherhood angle and lets him be heroic in a more personal way. If you love Rachel Weisz's Evie, this gives her a larger mythological role, even if the script does not always explore it as deeply as it could. And if you just want a big, fast, pulpy movie that feels like a haunted treasure map turned into a roller coaster, this is absolutely your kind of ride. But if you need tight storytelling, careful pacing, realistic effects, and grounded emotional development, this movie may frustrate you. The Mummy Returns asks for a lot of patience with coincidence, destiny, reincarnation, magical rules, and blockbuster excess. It does not always stop to justify itself. It often says, trust the ride, we are moving. And if you are not in the mood for that kind of storytelling, the whole thing can feel overstuffed. Would I say watch it in cinema, on streaming, or own it? For most people, streaming is the right choice. This is perfect comfort adventure viewing. It is the kind of movie you put on when you want noise, movement, charm, monsters, sand, jokes, and a world that feels bigger than your living room. But if you are a fan of the franchise, or if the Mummy movies are part of your personal nostalgia box, owning it makes sense. This is not just a sequel you analyze. It is a sequel people return to because of how it feels, and honestly, that feeling matters. The Mummy Returns is a film about the past trying to reclaim the living, but its best quality is that it feels alive. Messy, loud, uneven, yes, but alive. The box may be overfilled, the lock may be rusty, and some of the treasure inside may not shine the way it once did. But when you open it, you still find adventure. Every film is a box. And we opened this one together, and that is our full breakdown of The Mummy Returns. If you stayed with me through the whole journey, through the ancient curses, the family stakes, the Scorpion King, Imhotep's tragic obsession, Evy's hidden past, Rick's loyalty, Alex's danger, and all the chaos inside this sequel, thank you, truly. This is the kind of movie that becomes more interesting when you do not only remember the action, but actually look at what the action is built on. Because underneath all the spectacle, this movie is asking something simple. What do we do with the past? Do we learn from it or do we let it control us? Do we carry love forward or do we turn it into obsession? Do we protect the future or do we keep digging up what should have stayed buried? That is why I still think The Mummy Returns is worth talking about. Not because it is perfect, it is not, but because it has enough heart, enough ambition, and enough wild adventure energy to keep pulling people back. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think The Mummy Returns is an underrated adventure sequel, or do you think it went too far compared to the first film? And more importantly, which version of this franchise do you prefer? The cleaner mystery of The Mummy from 1999 or the bigger mythological chaos of The Mummy Returns? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this is one of those movies where the debate is almost as fun as the ride itself. If you enjoyed this breakdown, like the video, subscribe to the Filmbox and come back for the next one because we are going to keep opening the films that shaped our memories, surprised us, frustrated us, and stayed with us long after the credits ended. The next box is already waiting. Every film is a box, and we've only just started opening them. That's the Film Box. See you in the next one.